Hi, it's CNT140. We're continuing on in Chapter 8 on our install. We just got done talking about not laying cabling on top of the ceiling tiles and gridwork. So now they remind us about fiber optic cables. These should be separated from all the copper cables. You shouldn't have fiber laying in the bottom of the tray and pile all the copper on top. If anything, you install interduct for the fiber optic and even maybe onto the side. Here's a piece of interduct reminding you that it kind of looks like swimming pool hose. I could install that in the tray and put it off to the side and pull my fiber optic through there and keep the bundles of copper cable away from that. That way there's no damage to those fiber cables in there. The performance of our cabling network is really dependent on the install. So the components used in the install have been tested, verified, etc. But I need to make sure they are installed correctly. So terminations, UTP fiber, etc. must be done correctly and tested. Test them where they're done. Kind of like as we've been doing stuff in the lab room, we install it, then we turn right around and test it and verify, is it working? Kind of like right then and there. So here's a whole bunch of reminders about that. All of our cabling components should be rated the same category. So in our network here, all the components should be rated for, like category 6, patch panel, cabling itself, outlet jacks, patch cables, all should be rated to category 6. Your system is only as strong as that weakest link, that weakest category, if you will. When I'm pulling cables, I need to make sure I'm not using excessive force. 25 pounds is the max force I should be pulling on our unshielded twisted pair cabling. So as I'm pulling it, I'm thinking about guiding it, maybe having a second person help me feed it out of the box, making sure if it's on a spool, I've done the whole flip a stool over and put a broom handle through the spool and use that as a way so it can spin freely. The boxes we get, just like when we pulled the cabling in our room, you notice we flipped them on their back and pull the cable out nice and easy and guide it so we don't get kinks or bends. If I'm doing multiple cables to room, I would put multiple spools or multiple boxes of cable there, pull them all at the same time. As I'm pulling cable, I'm watching the bend radius as we're going around corners. Okay, we're hitting that a couple times now. And they also talk if you need to route through any kind of conduit, we need to make sure we're not pulling with a lot of force. And if need be, you can use a pulling lubricant for that cable to reduce the friction. But make sure that lubricant is rated for that cable or that insulation of cable, if you will. The wrong lubricant could actually degrade that jacket or the cable over time. Any sort of bundling of cabling we should be trying to do with our Velcro ties, our hook and loop ties, like we did in the lab room. Try to avoid the plastic cable ties. But if you do need to use them, make sure they are not snug. That way you're not damaging the cable inside. They remind us about these boxes of pulling cable from boxes. The boxes are usually designed to allow easy pulling. If I need to do multiple cable drops to a room, I'm going to use multiple boxes. Bundle them all together and pull to the room all at one time. Each box usually has about 1,000 feet in. And actually the cabling, if we start looking at the cable jacket, there usually is distance marked on there. So you could, as you pull that box, note that it shows a distance of 154. If I write that down and I pull cabling and I get to 254, I know that's a 100-foot cable run. That it can be handy to do. It also is handy to note how much is in the box. So I don't start pulling the cable down the hallway and run out of cable. Okay. That's a handy little thing to note. So again, if I'm doing multiple cables, I use multiple boxes, use multiple spools, if you will, pull them all at one time, and reminding us about, writing down the distance on the box before you pull it. Typically, we're going to pull cabling from the closet out to the rooms. That way I can leave all my boxes of cabling and tools and markers and everything in there and hopefully not disturb other stuff going on in the building. Again, as we're routing, we're avoiding lights, power lines, etc., HVAC systems, as I'm doing. And I might even use some tools to help me get cable across parts of our building. They actually make different fish fish poles and fish rods that I can use to help get over a stretch or through a wall, and even make little, it almost kind of reminds you of like a little dart gun that I can shoot with a little spool on, that I can shoot it over there, tie it onto the cable, and pull it back, if you will. If I need to pull cable distances or bundles, I might even make a pull rope, or I take the end of the cable, bend it over itself, and make a little handle, if you will, that I can pull it. And then I would need to cut that off when I get there, because that end would not be usable for termination. I would need to cut that off when I'm done. After I'm pulling, support with trays, hangers, J-hooks, that sort of thing, gentle bends. Here's some J-hooks, make sure I'm supporting. And there is actually in the standard requirements on how often you need to support that cabling so it does not sag under its own weight. If I'm doing cabling riser installs from closet to closet, you typically want to lower the cable down through. That's a lot easier to do. Let the gravity help you with this. It's usually kind of a two-person job to do that as well. Makes it a little bit easier to do. And here talk about, backbone cable down through your closets here. With my install, we're typically putting 2 outlets in a work area. And again, we have the closet side patch panel. Work area outlet side, we have the outlet jack, and those are the terminations we've been doing in the lab room. Remember, patch cables are stranded cabling that we're going to use, stranded conductor cabling, and are going to get terminated into your modular 8-pin connectors. Okay, that's how you're going to terminate your patch cables. And my solid cabling that's going to the outlet jacks gets terminated in the outlet jack, and the other end gets terminated into the patch panel. Remember, with all of those, we want to make sure we have our wire untwist to the minimal amount. The max should be 1/2 inch. We're trying to keep it well under that to avoid opportunities for crosstalk. So here, way too much wire untwist. Here, wire untwist. Here, wire untwist. We're trying to make sure we avoid that. So we have, this is better. These are twisted out to the termination. Those are better. Remember, with outlets, we have a color code. We're following the color code on the side of the outlet jack. On the patch panel, there's a color code. We're following the color code that's printed on the patch panel. And as I deal with our patch cables, there is your 568A and 568B color code that we'll follow for our terminations. Patch panel termination, kind of remember what we did in the lab room. We stripped off the end of the insulation. We untwisted the wires and laid them in the proper location and punched them in. Our patch panel looked a little bit different than this. Once we laid them in, we then used our punch down tool. We used the 110 side, made sure the chisel was on the waste side of the wire, and then punched those in. Okay, and this looks more like what we did in the lab room. The cable comes in the middle, and we're routing above and below. Outlet jack termination, remember what we did in the lab room as well. Strip off the end of the cable jacket, get our outlet jack ready. This is actually a style we used previously, but same kind of process here. I get my outlet jack ready. I feed my wires through the connector part, the back connector part. Once they're through, fan them out into the proper location. This looks like the one we use in the lab room now. And then lay it into the termination tool and crimp it up. This looks like the connector we now used in the lab room. Still same basic process. With patch cables, any patch cables you might need to terminate, remember this process as well. We're using the stranded core conductor again. Here, strip off the end of the jacket, fan the wires out, lay them in color code order, flatten them out, trim them to length so they fit into the connector, make sure the whole way in the connector, then crimp. And this is the sort of termination you should now have. That's the sort of termination you should now have for your patch cable. So remember all those things we did in the lab room. All of those things need to be done correctly for my cable system to work. All those terminations to be done correctly. Toward the end of the chapter, they remind us about some safety. You're often installing cabling where there is potential power lines around. So you need to, kind of orient yourself, look out for those. You might, if you're doing a lot of cabling install, you might even need to do a little bit of training on the side on electrical power line safety kind of thing to make sure you're not going to get any sort of electricity through you that you don't want. We'll put it that way. Premise cabling is low voltage, but it is run or routed in an area where there could be power lines, or often is power lines. So use caution there. They remind us about in some areas you might need your hard hat safety glasses. We especially need safety glasses when we're terminating fiber and those sorts of things. You might need gloves for pulling cable, that sort of stuff. Watch out for your ladders. If working in a busy area, you might need to kind of block off where you're working, so people don't knock you off the ladders they're coming through. Inspections, again, as we're installing cabling, electrical inspectors do not always inspect communication wiring, but in some areas you might need to get it inspected. So you might need to do a little homework in an area of, is it required in this area and who's doing it? What do they need to see? When do they need to, what do they need to see and when do they need to see it? Last but not least, they give us a whole bunch of installation tips. That's kind of the stuff I was showing you up there about your different terminations. Remember all those different things you talked about? And then they give you a whole bunch of reminders here about pulling from the box, 25 pounds of force, watch sharp bends around corners, riser, do the overhead install, cables need to be supported trays, J-hooks, that sort of thing, cable ties, use the Velcro hook and loop, if you will, follow any special manufacturer instructions, and make sure you're following any codes for fire stop and those sorts of things, grounding, bonding, that sort of thing. And those should be the tips for install.